During our recent trip to Krakow, Poland, we visited one of the most infamous sites in World War II and world history. About an hour and a half outside of Krakow is Auschwitz concentration camp. Auschwitz was the most deadly and murderous concentration camp set up by the Nazis during World War II. It was set up in a Polish village that the Nazis moved in, took over, and changed the name to Auschwitz to sound more German.
We didn't want to do one of our regular vlogs while we were here in order to really soak up the experience and be as respectful as possible to this site. But we did get a little bit of film footage that we wanted to share, and also to share some information about Auschwitz and what it's like visiting there.
One of the very first things that you need to know about visiting Auschwitz is that tickets need to be booked really far in advance online. Individual tickets into the camp are actually free, but they also offer really good guided tours in a large assortment of languages that do come at a fee. Individual tickets and guided tour tickets both have a limited space per day, and that's why you need to book the tickets online in advance. The English tours did seem to fill up a lot faster than the other languages, but the other ones did fill up as well pretty quickly. But don't think if you don't book it online in advance that you do not get to go and see Auschwitz, because there are some day of tickets that you can show up and get, but the lines get extremely long really quickly, and it opens at 7:30 in the morning, so you have to be there extremely early, but there are sometimes some availability.
We decided to go with a different option, which was to book a private tour that's separate from the camp. These tours can be found online. We just Googled some private tours and a ton of different options came up. You can also book them in the city of Krakow in person. There are a lot of different places to book tours. I found ours online, and it was $77 total for the both of us, which included picking us up from our Airbnb, driving us the hour and a half to get to Auschwitz, a guide, and our group size was about 18 to 20 people. Other important information to know before going to Auschwitz is what you can bring into the camp. So food is not allowed inside of the camp, but there are restaurants that are outside and around in the little village around the camp. They're also very strict about bag sizes. So I looked up online before, and it said you can bring a bag the size of an A6 piece of paper, which I wasn't really sure what that meant. So I brought just my little backpack that I thought would be a good size, but our guide told us that even that was kind of questionable. So we just ended up leaving that in the bus and just stuffing our pockets with whatever we needed. And I would recommend just bringing a small purse if you're gonna bring anything. Probably just avoid a backpack overall. Another thing to remember is that this is a somber site. It's like visiting a cemetery, so you want to be really respectful in how you dress and how you act when you're going to the site. We were picked up a little after 7 and arrived at the camp at 8:30 a.m. After we arrived, our group had time for a little bathroom break and relax, and then we reconvened and went into the camp. We had to wait in line to go through security, and their security was really tight, like airport security. We had to put any bags through the metal detector, empty all of our pockets, and go through a metal detector ourselves. And then after we went through security, everyone was given a headset, and our guide had a mic that we were able to listen to her give us our tour through. The museum requires groups of 10 people or above to have these headsets, so we were given the headsets by the camp.
Something that I guess I never realized when learning about this part of history was that Auschwitz wasn't just one concentration camp. It was a system of over 40 concentration and extermination camps in the town of Auschwitz. Where we started our tour was referred to as Auschwitz I, and this is the camp where you see the most famous Arbeit macht frei over the entrance to this camp, which is a German saying, "Work makes you free," which is a total farce and lie to those that came into the camp. As we moved into the camp, this is when we first started learning that Auschwitz I used to be a Polish military installation that the Nazis moved in and converted into this concentration camp. The brick buildings all around served many different purposes, but one of the main purposes were that the blocks served as the barracks to the prisoners at this camp. Now the blocks serve as museums to the life inside the camp, the low standard of living, the types of people that came there, as well as individual stories for individual prisoners that were held at Auschwitz I. We moved into the first block, and this museum was all about the in-processing and the beginnings of Auschwitz and how it came to be. There were lots of moving installations that showed mounds and mounds of shoes and briefcases and dishes, just things that the prisoners brought with them under the impression that they were going there to start living under this new occupation, and they would be living in these camps for good. These goods are things that the Nazis stole from them as they entered the camp and used it for themselves. One of the most moving and tragic things that we saw inside this, where there was no photography allowed, was literally an entire room that was full of tons and tons of human hair that were shaved from the prisoners that the Nazis were using to make fabric.
Our group only took us to 4 of the blocks, but there were many, many more to see. Of course, the majority of the prisoners held at this camp were Jews, but it seemed like a lot of the other blocks were dedicated as museums to a lot of the other groups that were held here, such as political opponents of the Nazi Party, Poles, Romas, homosexuals, Russians, and many, many more groups. The Auschwitz website recommended that you could spend 2.5 to 3 hours looking through this whole part of Auschwitz I, but since we were with a group, we weren't able to spend that much time here, but I'm sure you could spend a long time going through all of these different parts of the museum.
One of the other major spots at Auschwitz I that you see besides the blocks is an actual gas chamber and crematorium where the extermination process was actually carried out. Once you arrived at this area, it's not required that you go into the gas chamber because it is extremely intense. Not everybody needs to go in and see that. Aubrey stayed out. I went in because it felt like it was important for me to go in and actually see that. And I think it's important for a lot of people to go in and see that and see the actual horrors of it to really make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. So whenever you enter into the gas chambers first, you enter into the area where the prisoners were told to disrobe because they were going to go in to be disinfected and shower. Then you enter into the actual gas chamber. When you're inside the gas chamber, you walk in, and it's just an extremely bleak and gray, massive room. And there are holes and tubes throughout the roof where the Zyklon B was actually dropped in to gas and poison and kill all those inside. One of the most horrific things about the gas chambers is when you're looking at the walls and there are actual claw marks and scratches all over the walls where people were clawing to get through the concrete to try to get out, desperately trying to save their lives, to no avail. Once you move through the gas chambers, you enter into the crematorium. Our tour guide had explained that this crematorium was destroyed and the pieces of the crematorium was reassembled to see what it actually looked like. And you can just see the meticulousness of the Nazis to try to get the bodies out and get rid of them as quickly as they could so they could kill more people very quickly. This is a kind of a rare thing too that we learned, is to actually find a real gas chamber and crematorium still standing, because as the Nazis fled at the end of the war, they tried to destroy all of that so that people wouldn't figure out just how horrible the atrocities were at the camps.
Our visit to the gas chambers and the crematorium was the conclusion of this portion of our tour and the final piece of our tour of Auschwitz I. This portion lasted about an hour and a half, and then after this we gave back our audio guides and loaded back on the bus. The bus then took us about 10 or 15 minutes to the second camp that we got to visit, which was Auschwitz II-Birkenau. And there are also buses that can take people between Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II, or it's about a 30-minute walk if you wanted to do that.
Auschwitz II-Birkenau is a massive, mostly destroyed field where a huge camp once stood that took up over 472 acres. One of the most scary things about the size of this camp is that it wasn't even completed. The Nazis never saw and never finished building their full vision for this camp, and they wanted it much bigger to be able to hold much more prisoners and kill way more people. This camp is probably best known to you by pictures of trainloads of people at Auschwitz being pulled off of these cargo trains and being divvied up by the Nazis to either work or to immediately die. This camp was really designed for perfecting, executing, and killing massive amounts of people. They even built train tracks directly to the middle of this camp to be able to more quickly and efficiently divide those people to either go to their deaths or go to work.
Since this portion of the tour was just big, wide open fields and wide open spaces, we didn't have headphones here. Our guide was able to just circle everybody up and we were able to hear her and receive information about that tour without headphones. There were huge gas chambers and crematoriums at the back of this camp, but they were completely destroyed by the Nazis as they fled, and so they were just rubble. The only building that we went inside during this portion of Auschwitz II was a women's barracks, and this particular women's barracks that we went in was specifically for women who were too sick to work and too weak, and it was essentially a place for them just to go and wait until they were sent to be killed.
Inside this building is where we could truly see some of the extremely appalling living conditions of the prisoners inside these camps. Inside this barrack were these huge open shelves that were supposed to act as beds for people just to pile up inside and sleep at night when they actually got to sleep. However, some of the prisoners were so sick that our tour guide told us that they weren't able to pull themselves up onto the beds and they would just lay on the floors. And because they were also so sick, they couldn't fight off the rats that would come and eat them while they were still living in the middle of the night. It was truly eerie being inside there, but so remarkable that some of these buildings actually remain standing, because you could see across the field and see that mostly just the areas of the chimneys at the end of the barracks where they were supposed to have warmth, even though they usually didn't have warmth inside of the cold Polish winters, those all that were standing for most of these blocks all over the field.
So another interesting thing that our tour guide told us was that after the prisoners were liberated, only a few short years later, this camp was turned into a museum and former prisoners were the first tour guides. Visiting these barracks concluded our tour of Auschwitz II-Birkenau. This portion lasted also an hour and a half, and then after this we were given another break before we got on the bus and did our hour and a half drive back to Krakow. So overall, our whole tour lasted 7 hours, and this included 3 hours of driving, about 3 hours of touring, and then about 40 minutes of breaks.
As you're walking around the barracks and the rest of these grounds, you just can't help but ask yourself, how can this possibly happen to a group of people, or how could people even allow something like this to actually happen? And you can't help but try to put yourself in their shoes and figure out, what would I have done if I was in that situation? That's something that I think is very important about these camps, is making people go there and think about these things so that we can try to never allow something like this to happen again. And so you can ask yourself those hard questions of, if in the future you start to see something like this starting to happen, what would you do to try to stop it?
Krakow overall was one of our favorite cities we visited, and we would highly recommend it. Auschwitz is also a must when visiting Krakow. This place marks one of the most awful pieces of history, but it is one that definitely should not be forgotten. And just as the plaque said as we entered, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Thanks so much for watching this video, you guys. We hope that you enjoyed seeing what to expect if you're planning on visiting Auschwitz. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and also subscribe. Or if you have any other questions that you may have about visiting Auschwitz, be sure to leave those in the comments below. We would love to hear from you and be able to help you out if we can. Thanks so much for traveling with us.